I'm 32-year-old Lisa Morgan, and I've always been Rebecca's responsible elder sister. As we grew older, we were inseparable, exchanging secrets and hopes. I was overjoyed to be her maid of honor when she got engaged. To arrange her ideal day, I spent thousands of dollars, countless hours, and my entire being. However, family dynamics are complex, particularly when my mother, Deborah, is in charge. I never thought she would utter those heartbreaking words to me while seeing me in the eyes. This story might just give you the strength you need, so please leave a comment below, hit like, and subscribe if you're viewing from somewhere struggling with family problems. Being Rebecca's older sister as a child meant that I frequently assumed the role of protector and mentor, helping her deal with anything from high school drama to teaching her how to tie her shoes. The one constant in her life was me. Deborah, our mother, was there for her at all times. She never concealed her partiality. Rebecca's artistic abilities and vivacious nature made her the ideal child. It was me, the pragmatic one, who needed to relax. Thomas, my father, was on the sidelines of our family dynamics and preferred harmony to conflict whenever my mother's actions went too far. I naturally became the family's issue solution because I was the responsible oldest child. I made arrangements for repairs when the roof started to leak. I discreetly used my money to make up the difference when my costs mounted. As we grew older, this trend persisted, with me providing Rebecca with financial support while she pursued her degree in art history. When the contributions of our parents were insufficient, I became a financial consultant for a prominent Boston firm after following my own route. The absurdity that I was expected to manage my family's money even though I was managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for customers didn't escape my notice. But I didn't mind. I was genuinely happy to help Rebecca realize her ambitions. 3 years ago, Rebecca and James Wilson met at an art gallery opening, and I knew right away that they were meant to be. James was not ostentatious about his family's wealth. He encouraged Rebecca's professional goals and appreciated her artistic viewpoint. Nobody was astonished when they announced their engagement after 2 years of dating. And Rebecca contacted me first, yelling with delight. He asked Lisa to be his maid of honor, so you accepted. Without you, I can't accomplish this. Happiness poured up in her voice that December morning. I will. Of course. I said I would. I'm already imagining how I could assist her realize her wedding fantasies. The preliminary planning phases were just as I had envisioned. On the weekends, Rebecca and I looked at locations, talked about color schemes, and made inspirational Pinterest boards. I made sure her goal became a reality by taking thorough notes during every conversation. Fabric swatches and bridal publications gradually filled my apartment. During what should have been a typical family dinner to talk about wedding costs, the first indication of problems appeared. I had never seen a leather-bound wedding planner before Mom brought it to me. Before everybody had even finished their salad. She declared, I've already made deposits at the Clayton Hotel. This summer, they only had one date available, so I jumped at the chance. Rebecca appeared astonished but happy. That's very kind of you, Mom. I was still comparing venues with Lisa. Though, the Clayton reservations are made a year in advance. Darling, fortunately for us, they had to cancel. Mom gave me a victorious look and patted Rebecca's hand. In addition, I've always thought of your wedding taking place there. Among the many decisions that were made without consultation, that was the first. In a matter of weeks, Mom had practically taken over, going from being an infrequent participant to controlling the wedding. Her friends' recommendations were taken into consideration instead of the vendors I had investigated. Rebecca and I had decided on a color palette, but it was suddenly too muted. Everything is all right. When I worried, Rebecca reassured me. This is a lot of fun for Mom, and it simplifies planning. She and her father are also making significant financial contributions, still offering assistance where I could, but feeling more and more like an outsider looking in. I bit my tongue and took a step back. When my cousin Megan began showing up and planning pictures on social media, that sensation became even more intense. Megan had consistently followed our family gatherings with a special interest in joining the inner circle. Suddenly, she was going to vendor meetings that I hadn't been asked to with Rebecca and Mom. She was holding color swatches against bridesmaid dress options in one Instagram picture, which I assumed would be my responsibility as maid of honor. These days, Rebecca and Megan appear to be more alike. One evening, while looking through yet another picture of them during a cake taste, I mentioned it casually to my boyfriend Tyler. "Perhaps Megan simply has more spare time," Tyler recommended. The voice of reason. Always. "This quarter, you've been quite busy at work." I nodded, ignoring the persistent fear that something more important was taking place. After all, for 30 years, Rebecca and I had been each other's constants. That couldn't be altered by a few weeks of wedding preparation, could it? However, the invites to organize events completely ceased coming as spring wore on. Rebecca's answers got hurried and more ambiguous when I called to check in. Quick texts took the place of in-depth conversations about music choices and centerpieces. Mom has already worked it out, or is managing it. In the meantime, I continued to contribute financially to the wedding by buying personalized welcome baskets for guests traveling from out of town, paying the deposit for the photographer Rebecca adored but Mom deemed too costly, and covertly organizing what I believed would be the ideal wedding present: a lavish honeymoon in Bali that includes a private villa with views of the ocean and first-class airfare. After the wedding, I promised myself everything would be back to normal. It was simply a stressful period. Soon after, in her newlywed apartment, my sister and I would chuckle over wine about Mom's wedding takeover. At the time, I had no idea how mistaken I was or how rapidly things would get worse than I could have imagined. It was like a kick to the chest the day I found out I wasn't invited to Rebecca's wedding dress. My coworker Natalie, who also happened to be friends with the owner of the store, asked me an innocent question and I found out. "How did yesterday's appointment with Rebecca go?" "Sandra said your sister immediately found the one." Halfway to my lips, I froze the coffee cup. Which appointment Natalie's face changed from one of excitement to one of discomfort. Sandra remarked, "Your mom, sister, and cousin had champagne and spent hours there at Elegant Moments." "I simply thought you were present as well." I said something about a last-minute business issue and fled to the restroom, where I gazed at my reflection and attempted to understand why I had been left out of such a significant occasion. Since we were teenagers, when we pretended that pillowcases were veils and vowed to support one another throughout our special times, Rebecca and I had discussed wedding dress shopping. That night, I gave Rebecca a call. I controlled my voice carefully. "How was the dress buying experience?" A pause. "Oh, everything happened so quickly." It wasn't intended to be the day of shopping. Mom had an appointment. Just a quick glance with Megan. One more pause. We needed a third opinion and she was free. I had the ability to set myself free. Silently. I said, "Lisa may have been consulted. Don't worry about this. You can participate in a lot of other wedding-related activities, but none of them came to pass. Although I was requested to provide financial support for the venue, I had no say in how the bridal shower was planned. Megan took over the bachelorette party planning and picked a location that I knew Rebecca wouldn't really like. After 30 years of knowing my sister, I made several suggestions, but they were rejected since they didn't align with Rebecca's current preferences. I still backed from the shadows. Though, I spent $8,600 on first-class airfare, opulent lodging, and unique experiences as I completed the honeymoon plans. I was sure the couple would fall in love. When I gave Rebecca the surprise at the rehearsal dinner, I could picture her reaction. I imagined the embrace and the restoration of our sisterly connection. In the meantime, we became more apart. Rebecca started turning down our customary Sunday brunches, but she always had a different reason. Our interactions felt forced and superficial when we did talk, not at all like the in-depth conversations we had normally had. Are things going well between us? After 3 weeks of increasingly intermittent communication, I eventually inquired bluntly. "It's all right. she answered. I'm just really busy with wedding stuff. Not looking me in the eye. Mom has been fantastic, taking care of every detail. 2 months before to the wedding, in May, at a family get-together. A conversation that I overheard chilled me to the bone. I heard my call coming from the next dining room as I entered the kitchen to refill my water glass. Lisa has never been easy. I could hear my mother's voice plainly. It's slowly dawning on Rebecca. Must always be in charge of everything. Focus entirely on her achievements. Rebecca must find it difficult, Megan answered, her voice brimming with phony pity. Particularly at her wedding, when she ought to be the focus of attention. That's right. For Rebecca's sake. We have had to reduce her involvement because of this. As their words sank in, I stood with my glass full of ice water. My own mother was deliberately trying to keep me out of my sister's wedding by portraying me to anyone who would listen as an attention-seeking monster. I finally opened up to Tyler about my anxieties, which I had been repressing for months. That night, what if they decide I'm no longer welcome at the wedding? What if the result of all this distance is worse? Tyler drew me in. His calm demeanor contrasted with my trembling hands. That isn't feasible. As Rebecca's sister, you have only ever been there for her. However, what if her mother has persuaded her to do otherwise? You have no idea how convincing she is, or how she manipulates situations. After that, you must speak with Rebecca directly. Firmly, Tyler said. No more speculating. Stop assuming that things will improve on their own. You must have an honest discussion about the situation. He was correct. Passive acceptance was not an option since the situation had gotten too bad. The next morning, I sent Rebecca a text. We must discuss our relationship and the wedding. Is it possible for us to meet tomorrow hours later? She responded. Quite busy with wedding-related tasks. On Thursday at 7 o'clock, stop by Mom and Dad's. Then we can speak. I had some of the longest days of my life during those 5 days. I practiced my response, my calm, accusation-free way of expressing my hurt. I reminded myself that our mother's strong personality might put strain on Rebecca, who might be stuck in the midst. I was filled with optimism for understanding and reconciliation when I arrived at our parents' place on Thursday night. I had no idea that I was about to enter a situation that would destroy my relationship with my family and make me reevaluate what it really meant to be loyal and respect oneself. When I parked outside my parents' colonial-style house that Thursday, the normally familiar driveway where Rebecca and I had played hopscotch as children felt strangely quiet. Before making my way to the front door, I fixed my blouse, took a deep breath, and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Before I could even ring the bell, Mom replied. Her face was unreadable. Without waiting for my answer, she turned abruptly and stated, "We're in the living room." It felt like a rehearsed scene inside. Dad sat in his favorite armchair, looking a little gray and uneasy. Rebecca took a seat on the sofa's edge, looked down, in her lap, fingers twisted, with one hand on the couch and her back in what appeared to be a protective position. Mom stood behind Rebecca. And there it was, where I had always been. Megan sat during family talks, appearing both arrogant and worried. What's happening when no one volunteered to sit with me? I asked to stay standing. Rebecca, I had assumed that we would discuss the wedding. We're all here for that reason. Before Rebecca could say anything further, Mom interrupted. You must comprehend a certain aspect of the wedding. A peculiar silence descended upon me. There seemed to be a lull before a storm. We've been talking about things, Mom added, adopting the condescending tone she had honed over the years as a family. We all concurred that your participation in the wedding has turned into a problem. Troublesome, I repeated, staring straight at Rebecca, who continued to avoid eye contact. Your need to make everything about yourself and your domineering actions, as if she were crossing things off a grocery list. Mom said, The way you have attempted to use your financial donations and opinions to overshadow Rebecca's particular occasion. I had the impression that I had entered a different reality, desperate for my sister to speak for herself. I prodded her. Rebecca. When she did look up, her face was a mix of prepared resolution and guilt. Lisa, it's simply been so stressful. There's tension whenever you get engaged. Mom. Thank you. Mother. Regards. I said it again, quietly. Rebecca, what are your thoughts? Mom moved forward, putting herself halfway between us before she could respond. According to Rebecca, her wedding ought to be a joyous affair. And to be honest, that would not be possible without you. As her words reflected my presence at the planning, the room appeared to tilt slightly. You mean, what can only be called a sneer curved Mom's lips. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction at finally landing the blow she had been planning for months. We all concurred, she said. You're not welcome at the wedding. Pronouncing each syllable as if she were enjoying a good glass of wine. As maid of honor, no. As a bridesmaid, no. Not as a visitor. This is best for everyone. There was complete stillness after that. In a seemingly interminable moment, I could hear the old clock on the mantel ticking away the seconds. Dad moved in his seat, but remained silent. Megan was civil enough to glance at the floor. And 30 years of sisterhood came to an end when Rebecca, my sister and best friend since the day she was born, sat in complicit quiet. I understand, I said, at last taken aback by how steady my voice was. And when did this choice get made? Mom said. We've been going in this direction for months. I was obviously delighted with my composed response. Weeks before, Rebecca asked Megan to be her maid of honor, mistaking her surprise for approval. All we had to do was make it official. I turned to face Megan, who now gave me a stern look. Well done. Flatly, I said. Nothing is personal. She answered. The ridiculousness nearly made the lie apparent laugh. There is nothing personal about taking my place at my sister's wedding or in her life. Rebecca, I gave it another go. Do you truly want this? Mom responded once more. Rebecca wants her wedding to be drama-free. You've always been overly opinionated and domineering. You must have your way in everything. The location was inadequate. Your expectations were not met by the caterer. That is untrue. You are aware of it. I broke off, sensing the first rift in my calm exterior. Even in cases where I wasn't consulted, I have backed every choice. I have made thousands of dollars in unasked contributions. My mother pointed accusingly. See? There it is. Flinging your cash in our direction, utilizing the money you have contributed to manage the wedding. That's precisely why you're unable to attend. I silently begged my father to say something. Anything at all. He looked aside after briefly meeting my gaze. His habit of avoiding confrontation has served him well throughout his life. A peculiar silence descended upon me, followed by a clarity that pierced the confusion and hurt. There was no miscommunication here. There was no way to resolve this issue through heart to heart. This exclusion has been carefully planned. It took months to develop. That's good to know, I said plainly. I turned and moved in the direction of the door. Behind me, my actions seemed robotic. Rebecca called my name once, quietly, but there were no footsteps. Nobody made an attempt to stop me. The trip home went by quickly. Unexpected tears welled up in my eyes, smearing the streetlights like watercolors. On 2 occasions, I stopped when the road became too hazy to drive safely. I couldn't force myself to look at the incoming texts that were buzzing on my phone. Tyler was waiting for me when I arrived at my flat, his face displaying a hopeful expectation that vanished as soon as he saw me. What took place? He pulled me into an embrace and asked right away, between sobs. The entire story spilled out in fragmented pieces. The surprise attack, Mom's sly smile, Rebecca's treachery. Dad didn't say anything. Megan's victory. This is not possible for them. When I was done, Tyler replied, his anger evident in his tone. Her sister is you. All you've done is encourage her. That doesn't seem to matter. With emotional tiredness starting to set in, I mumbled, for months. Mom has been trying to turn Rebecca against me, portraying me as a villain of some sort. How will you respond? Tyler inquired. His hand felt warm against mine. I felt empty but somehow lighter as I gazed out the window at the city lights below. As though the worst had occurred, I could start rebuilding now. I acknowledge that I'm not sure yet, but I know I'm worthy of better. Everything. I was unaware at the time that the altercation that night was not the end of the tale. It was only a prelude to what was to follow, the depths of treachery as well as the surprising road to recovery that would emerge in the days that followed. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay up, reliving the situation at my parents' house, scrutinizing every word and glance, trying to find any clues that I might have misread. However, there was no room for doubt because I remembered my mother's contented grin when she gave her decision. I had completely given up on sleep by 4 a.m. I started listing all the things I had done to help plan Rebecca's wedding while I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea becoming cold next to me. $500 is the photographer's deposit, $1,800 for personalized welcome boxes for visitors from out of town. I had planned a surprise string quartet for the wedding, $1,200. As I recalled minor expenses, the list grew longer. Rebecca's grandmother's earrings matched the vintage hairpin I had discovered. Rebecca expressed how much she loved hand calligraphy, so I hired a calligrapher to do the place cards, the honeymoon follows, the centerpiece of my presents to James and my sister. Flights to Bali in first class, $200. The private villa overlooking the ocean, $800. The unique experiences I had planned, cookery class in private, cruise at sunset, trip with a guide to undiscovered waterfalls, $600. In total, I had spent more than $15,000 on a wedding that I was no longer allowed to go to. I made my choice just as the first rays of dawn were appearing. With firm fingertips, I opened my laptop and browsed to my banking app. The $600 honeymoon fund was moved back to my own account. I then went to the websites of the airline and the resort and systematically canceled every reservation. I informed the travel agent in charge of the special experiences in a succinct, business-like email that the arrangements had shifted. I hadn't looked at my phone, which had been vibrating sporadically all night with incoming calls and texts. I looked at the notifications now. Rebecca missed 3 calls, Mom missed 12, and Dad missed 1, which was out of the ordinary. The majority of the texts were from Mom, and they ranged from accusatory to protective. You're making this all about you again, following all that we have done for you. Nothing that suggested regret or change of heart. I called my credit card company one last time. I have some unauthorized charges to report. I gave the representative an explanation. Without my consent, family members have been making transactions. While it wasn't totally true, it wasn't completely false either. I had never specifically given my mother permission to use my credit card information to pay for the extra wedding favors she had bought last month, or the better linens she had demanded by 7 a.m. I had carefully disentangled Rebecca's wedding from my financial obligations. I explained that I needed a personal day in a quick email to my supervisor. After that, I switched my phone off entirely. The unexpected quiet was both freeing and frightening. In an attempt to comprehend the enormity of what had transpired, I spent the morning strolling through the public gardens. The treachery was tangible, a real pain under my ribs that became worse with every breath. For 30 years, Rebecca and I had been together through everything. Secrets, dreams, festivities. How was she able to remain silent when my mother expelled me from her wedding? How could she have chosen Megan, of all people, to take my place? I went to lunch with my best friend Olivia at around noon. I didn't want to tell her anything, but she could tell something was seriously wrong just by looking at my face. What did they do? When I finished explaining, she yelled so loudly that people at nearby tables turned to stare. That was spoken directly to your face by your own mother. I pushed salad around my plate without eating, nodding. Rebecca remained silent as she sat there. After hours of introspection, Olivia's anger was being validated. She made a few attempts to talk, but Mom kept cutting her off and didn't stop her, so I trailed off. The pain is still too intense to properly describe. Across the table, Olivia grabbed for my hand. Lisa, you should be aware of this. I didn't want to disturb you, so I didn't tell you earlier. Now, though, I believe you should hear it. My stomach grew constricted. What is it? For months, your mother has been making comments about you. Olivia appeared uneasy. She informed my mother that you were envious of Rebecca's pleasure during her engagement celebration. She also noted how everyone was worried about your delicate emotional state and how the family was being cautious around you at last month's dinner gathering at Williams. Stunned, I gazed at her. Why would she say that I'm not sure? However, she has been sowing these tiny seeds with all of your acquaintances. Little remarks, worried glances, nothing overt enough to come out as malevolent, just enough to give the idea that you're unstable and challenging in some way. Olivia gave me a hand squeeze. I'm not everywhere, but whenever I hear it, I shut it down. I remembered my mother's voice, your domineering actions, your tendency to put yourself first. She had done more than simply turn Rebecca against me. She had been deliberately sabotaging me with everyone we spoke to. However, why more to myself than to Olivia? I muttered. What does this control give her? Olivia said plainly. You're prosperous, self-sufficient, and successful. What she never did. You have. Your mother appeared envious of you, my mother used to say. Even as children, decades of minor injustices and manipulations were revealed as the parts started to fit together in a new pattern. I had accepted or justified the occasions when my mother had neglected to inform me about family gatherings. The sarcastic remark about my work, it's incredible. Without a husband to help you, you've done incredibly well. Her subtle reminders of all the slights I'd given Rebecca as a youngster, while ignoring everything I'd done to defend and encourage my sister. Finally, I responded, I've been so blind. As a daughter, you wanted to think the best of your mother. Olivia made a kind correction. Blindness is not what that is. Love is that. I felt different by the time I got home that afternoon. Although I was still in pain, I had a better understanding of what was going on and what I had to do. I reactivated my phone and observed the inundation of notifications. Voicemails totaling 28 missed calls, from my father's awkward attempts at making amends to my mother's icy rage. Additionally, Rebecca sent one message at 3:42 a.m. that made all the difference. Lisa, I'm very sorry. For months, Mom has been lying to me about you. James and I recently learned what she'd done with the bookings for the honeymoon. Give me a call. Please. Please. My sister must return. I kept my thumb lingering over the phone button without actually hitting it as I looked at Rebecca's message for a while. Her text's unadulterated emotion seemed sincere. However, following months of deception and the violent confrontation yesterday, I wasn't prepared to return to the pandemonium without further knowledge. The other texts depicted the breakdown of a family. The tone of Mom's voicemails changed from righteously outraged to threatening. How dare you cancel the honeymoon after promising it as a gift? You have forced me to make an unpersuasive attempt at reconciliation by telling everyone about your actions. If you apologize, we can still make this right. Dad was sending out fewer and softer messages. In one background noise, he said, Your mother is very upset, as if he was calling from his car so he wouldn't be overheard. All of this was unknown to me until yesterday. When you can, please give us a call. Other relatives had also started to comment. My Uncle Robert, who has always supported my mother, gave me a harsh lesson on how to treat parents with respect. In her faltering voice, my grandmother inquired as to how I was feeling. evidently having heard Mom's side of the story. However, Aunt Catherine, who didn't often get engaged in family drama, received unexpected support and left a very strong note. Lisa, I've seen your mom do this before. She treated me the same way she treated your father. Give me a call. We must speak. I made the decision to start there by first phoning my father's sister. Lisa, I see. The line was instantly filled with Aunt Catherine's friendly voice. I've been really anxious. Are you okay? Not at all. I confessed. Aunt Cath, I have no idea what's going on. Why would Mom do this? She said plainly. Since you threatened her, you've always done so. You've been so capable and self-sufficient since you were young. Deborah must be in charge of everything. She responds by turning my sister against me when that is contested, by preventing me from attending the wedding. She does it. Catherine let out a sigh. She treated me the same way. When I was your age, I always got along well with your father. But everything changed when he met Deborah. She fabricated disputes that never existed. I told your father that by the time of their wedding, I had spoken horrible things about her. I was also not welcome. I took a seat and gave this realization a lot of thought. I never heard that from Dad. Thomas has consistently favored harmony over conflict, particularly when it comes to your mother. Only years later did we finally get back together, and never before. She lowered her voice. However, this isn't about the past. The goal here is to break the pattern. Now, before Rebecca's friendship with you is irreparably ruined, I called Andrea, my undergraduate best friend who worked as a therapist without violating confidentially. After talking to Catherine, she gave me insight into the dynamics involved. My connection with Rebecca has been influenced by narcissistic tendencies, triangulation, and the golden child scapegoat dynamic since I was a young child. Andrea stressed that the most crucial thing is to safeguard your personal boundaries while allowing Rebecca to retrace her steps. She has been tricked into remembering. My phone called once more while I was still digesting this advice. Rebecca's fiancé, James. Lisa. He sounded like he was really upset. I'm glad you responded. Here. There has been anarchy. For hours, Rebecca has been in tears. What took place, James? I didn't want to be trusted, so I spoke in a neutral tone. We learned about your mother's activities, the emails she changed, the lies she has been saying. Lisa, Rebecca was unaware that you were not allowed to shop for dresses. Your mother informed her that you were unable to attend, showed her your texts, canceling. What I didn't text anyone. Now we are aware of that. It appears like your mother staged discussions to portray Rebecca, giving the impression that you were too preoccupied or uninterested in the wedding-related events. When we addressed her, his voice became stern. She acknowledged rerouting some of your texts to her own phone and altering the names in Rebecca's phone's contact list. The degree of intentional manipulation was astounding. However, Rebecca believed that the purpose of the meeting yesterday at the house was to make amends. According to your mother, you have been talking awful things about the wedding because everyone was so hurt that you had to hear it. She had no idea what had truly transpired. My mind was racing. Why is she using you to tell me this because she's afraid you won't talk to her ever again? Moreover, he hesitated. After you departed last night, your mother arrived at our apartment. She was yelling about ungrateful kids who were asking that we pick sides when she was ill. Neighbors phoned building security because it had gotten that awful. I couldn't keep up with how quickly things were getting out of control. James deserves my gratitude. All of this is excessive. I get it. Please don't close the door all the way. You are loved by Rebecca. She has also been tricked. I stated I'd be in contact shortly, but I made no promises. Before I could fully comprehend this talk, my work phone rang. Our office receptionist, Sandra, was there. Lisa, I'm sorry to disturb you on your day off, but this is a serious matter. About 20 minutes ago, your mother came and insisted on seeing you. I told her that you weren't in. She's creating quite a stir in the lobby, though. The worst possible collision was occurring between my personal and professional lives. What precisely is she doing accusing? You've taken money from her, and you're telling anybody who will listen that you're having a breakdown of some sort? Sandra spoke more quietly. She's getting more and more unpredictable, despite Mr. Daniel's best efforts to manage it. Right there. I said as I reached for my keys. It felt like I had entered a combat zone throughout the 15-minute journey to my office. Mom had never been to my place of employment before and had only expressed a passing interest in my profession outside of its financial benefits to the family. She was now there to specifically target the professional reputation I had worked so hard to establish over the years. When I got there, I heard my mother's voice echoing through the lobby as security escorted her out of the building. You're not aware of her full potential. She has been troubled all her life. My face was burning with shame as my co-workers saw the situation. My immediate supervisor, Mr. Daniels, came over with a worried expression. Take as much time as you need to deal with this personal issue, Lisa, he replied softly. Your effort is self-evident. Unfounded claims are not being taken seriously here. Although I should have been reassured by his support, the public display made me feel vulnerable and violated. This was no longer just a wedding. As security led my mother to the parking lot, Mom was actively working to undermine the underpinnings of my life, my relationships, my reputation, and my career. Across the foyer, her eyes met mine, rather than the regret or embarrassment that one might anticipate. All I saw was icy rage and worse, gratification for upsetting my meticulously planned environment. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. A clear-eyed adult who finally recognized the pattern of manipulation for what it was took the place of the wounded youngster vying for the acceptance of his mother. It wasn't love, it wasn't family. This was mistreatment. It had continued long enough. I went back to my flat and decided what to do. It was time to deal with the matter for good, not with feelings, but with cool, indisputable facts. To spell out exactly what had happened and set boundaries that would safeguard my well-being moving forward, I would meet with Rebecca and any other parties involved. It was unclear if such limits applied to going to the wedding or even keeping in touch with my mother. However, I realized for the first time that I was entitled to better treatment than I had been given, and I was ready to demand it. 2 days later, I sat at a corner table at a calm cafe that was midway between Rebecca's and my place. I had come early to calm myself, organizing printed proof in a folder next to me, screenshots of the real texts that refuted Mom's fake ones, and email confirmations of the wedding plans. I had created bank statements that demonstrated my contributions. Rebecca showed up by herself, appearing thinner. Her typical self-assurance somehow faded. Her eyes had the same dark bags under them that mine did. She slipped into the chair across from me and whispered softly, "Thank you for coming." James won't be coming. After our phone chat, I expected him, so I asked. He's parking his vehicle. I wanted to spend some time with you alone initially. She placed her purse next to her, her hands shaking a little. I'm not really sure where to start. Lisa. I waited, allowing her time to think of anything to say. Nothing about this situation had gone as planned. But this wasn't how I had imagined our first chat after the confrontation to go. I trusted her. At last. Rebecca's voice broke. Mom has been showing me texts from you for months now, canceling plans and saying that you were too busy with your important work to worry about the specifics of my wedding and that you thought my selections were tacky. Her cheeks were wet with tears. It was easier to believe her than to believe my mother would intentionally and fully lie. Did she show you phony texts, still unable to fully grasp the magnitude of the deceit? I questioned. Rebecca took out her phone and nodded. James worked it out. Take a look at this. She opened her texting app and scrolled to the exchanges we had. However, those weren't even my words. Messages claiming to come from my number but written in a voice very different from mine dismissed wedding plans, complained about expenses, and made crude comments about her choices. My phone was in Mom's possession. She put her number into a contact. However, "What is your name?" I was texting her while I mistakenly believed I was texting you. She would then reply by posing as you. Rebecca rubbed her eyes and erased your actual messages. Half of the items you sent me were never delivered. It was astounding how meticulous the deception was. However, what about the time we actually met? You could sense something wasn't right, couldn't you? Over the previous few months, we had hardly seen one another. Every time you were unable to attend a wedding, Mom had an excuse. Additionally, she was constantly present when we did meet, directing the discussion and casting whatever you said in the worst possible light. Afterward, James walked over to the table, and Rebecca looked up. She tainted everything. After setting down 3 coffees, James sat down next to Rebecca. "I'm really sorry, Lisa. I ought to have noticed what was going on sooner. How were you able to solve it?" I inquired. James clarified that the turning point was the canceling of the honeymoon. Rebecca wasn't even aware of the Bali vacation, so she was perplexed when she received the notification. "According to your mother, you canceled the lavish honeymoon you had promised, retaliatory after being properly barred from the wedding. However, that was illogical." Rebecca spoke out. "If you were as bitter as Mom said, why would you spend thousands on a honeymoon for us?" Thus, we began our investigation by looking through her phone logs and comparing message timestamps. James added that the entire hoax collapsed once we began searching for contradictions. We discovered a folder on your mother's tablet, which served as the last piece of evidence. In reality, she had been preserving screenshots of fictitious exchanges she had made up, most likely to support her claims. My folder was pushed across the table. I brought all of my own documentation, including original emails and bank transfers, while James and Rebecca went over the paperwork. From shock to horror to indignation, their faces changed. There was no greater contrast between my real words and deeds and what my mother had depicted. Rebecca assumed we were meeting to address misunderstandings that day at your parents' place. James remarked, "She was unaware that your mother intended to forbid you from attending the wedding." Rebecca acknowledged, with humiliation in her voice, that I froze when Mom began speaking those awful things, saying that we had all agreed. I was stunned. You were gone before I could comprehend what was occurring. Across the table, she stretched for my hand. "Lisa, I never consented to keep you out of my wedding. Never. My sister is you, my closest companion. Without you, I can't get married." A surge of emotion that I hadn't anticipated for months was brought on by the validation of my experience. I had been duped into doubting my own opinions and value inside my family. Mom needs to be discussed. Once I could trust my voice again, I said, "This is not typical conduct. This deception is purposeful and well-planned," James remarked solemnly. "It gets worse. Rebecca addressed your mother after you left that night. Her statements, the poison. It was similar to witnessing someone change into someone else." Rebecca gave a nod. She acknowledged all of it, but she showed no regret. She claimed to be shielding me from your harmful influence. She threatened to cut off all financial support and inform everyone in the family that I was having a pre-wedding breakdown when I expressed my desire for you to return to the wedding. Similar to her remarks on me, I whispered, "That's right," James attested. "She uses it as a pattern to disparage anyone who opposes her." The following hour was devoted to outlining the complete scope of my mother's deception, including the changed texts and the redirected invitations. Our social circle was rife with whispers, and each financial control revelation built on the one before it, painting a complete picture of decades of planned emotional abuse. "Finally," I added, "I've set up a meeting with Dad, Catherine, and some other family members who need to know the truth. A kind of impartial family intervention. Will you come tomorrow evening?" Rebecca said, without hesitation. She nodded. "Naturally. Everyone needs to know the truth." The next evening's family meeting was both essential and challenging. Aunt Catherine's living room was where we all convened. James, Rebecca, and I, Uncle Paul, Dad, and Aunt Catherine. Additionally, Martha, our maternal grandma, explicitly requested to be included after receiving alarming calls from Mom. I meticulously and emotionally presented the evidence, the financial records, the witness reports of Mom's public actions, and the phony texts. Catherine related comparable experiences from previous decades. At their flat, James recounted Mom's breakdown. Dad remained quiet for the majority of the presentation. The more proof he gathered, the more gray his face became. When he did say something, he could hardly be heard speaking. "I was aware of some of it," he said. "Not to that degree, but enough that I ought to have taken action long ago." His eyes were filled with regret as he gazed at me. "I didn't want to protect you. I wanted tranquility." "Lisa, I'm very sorry." Mom was the last to arrive. Her assured entry stumbled when she observed the gathered group and the evidence strewn all over the coffee table, even though she had been informed that this was a conversation about the wedding budget. "What is this?" She made a demand, eyes flitting from face to face. "An opportunity for truth," I said plainly. What came next was terrible and expected. First, rejection. Accusations of conspiracy against her attempts to use tried-and-true manipulative techniques to attract allies. I will not be treated in this manner when those failed, when there was anger, icy and cutting, then heated and uncontrollable, and last, when confronted with indisputable proof, tears and accusations of miscommunication and a desire to solely look out for the family. When her performance left everyone unimpressed, she declared, "Following Rebecca's wedding and everything I've done for this family," Rebecca stood up to speak directly to our mother and interrupted, talking about the wedding. "I've always wanted Lisa to be my maid of honor. You will have a very limited role at the wedding and in our future lives if you are unable to accept it and treat her with respect." Mom's expression twisted in disbelief. "She is the one you would pick above your own mother." "I'm going with the truth instead of manipulation," Rebecca said calmly. "Health is more important to me than toxicity. This will never be permitted by your father, for what may have been the first time in their marriage." Mom turned to Dad with a look of expectation on her face. Dad didn't back down to maintain harmony. "Deborah, enough. Take a look at your actions. Examine the proof. This is over." There was no tidy conclusion to the intervention. Mom stormed out, vowing to punish us for our treachery. However, a fundamental change had occurred. The people it was intended to control difficult family members and wedding dynamics, for example, had revealed, identified, and rejected the pattern of manipulation. For the first time, I felt like we were all moving in the same direction, that is, toward truth and better relationships, even though we were still a long way from the finish line. No matter what that means for the wedding, which is only a few weeks away. Our broken family was beginning to settle into a tentative new normal the week before Rebecca's wedding. Mom had tried a number of strategies after the intervention, including frigid silence and heartfelt requests for understanding, anger-filled charges followed by a reluctant public acknowledgement of the new limits we had set. We were all taken aback when Dad firmly defended Rebecca's choice to restore me as maid of honor. He appeared to have found a source of strength after decades of eschewing conflict in favor of peace. We were all unaware of his possession, he said to me in private, on the balcony of my flat, with the city lights glittering below. "I should have protected you both long ago." I persuaded myself that remaining silent equated to maintaining harmony. I was mistaken. "Dad, why now?" Gently, I inquired. What was different? For a long time, he gazed into his coffee cup, observing everything arranged in that manner. The fact that it was intentional, I was no longer able to avoid it. And I'm so exhausted, Lisa. I'm sick of having to tread carefully. I'm sick of acting as though nothing is wrong. It was frightening and healing to see how vulnerable he was. I had optimism that real change would be achievable because of this new version of my father who was prepared to face the hard facts, apologize, and change day by day. Rebecca and I had been reestablishing our relationship. Our relationship was strained yet unbroken. We had spent many hours discussing the deceptions that had caused us to drift apart. We were mourning the months of sisterhood that had passed. At one of our reconciliation breakfasts, she remarked, "I can't stop wondering what would have happened if James hadn't found out about those phony texts." Return to their proper position in our weekly schedules. Let's not consider that, squeezing her hand across the table. I made the suggestion. We've arrived. Regarding Mom, she had been given explicit instructions by the family. She could attend the wedding, but she would have a very limited role. No more making decisions on your own. No confidential discussions with suppliers. No family members were singled out or coerced. She would have used the expression dripping with disdain if I had declined these terms. After that, you will only be present as a guest and won't have any say in how the ceremony or reception is run. To everyone's amazement, Rebecca had made a forceful statement. Mom had finally given in. However, it appeared that her acquiescence was more calculated than sincere. The real narrative was revealed by the resentful sparks in her eyes that were soon covered up by fake pleasantness. My own experience with this trauma had changed me in unanticipated ways. Clarity about family dynamics had replaced the first devastation. I had become too accustomed to it, collaborating with a family trauma specialist therapist in my own behavior. I had started to see enabling and people-pleasing behaviors that had left me open to manipulation. What you provide to other people doesn't determine your value. During a particularly challenging session, I was reminded by Dr. Marshall, not monetary, not on an emotional level, practically speaking. No. As the last stages of wedding preparations approached, these words became a catchphrase. With a renewed sense of self-control, I returned to my position as maid of honor. Yes, I would help Rebecca with last-minute things and help organize the bridesmaids. No, I wouldn't spend all of my money or jeopardize my health in order to control the feelings of others. Additionally, I had rescheduled a modified honeymoon package for James and Rebecca. Though scaled to reflect my newfound awareness of healthy giving, the generosity remained. This is an unrestricted gift that is freely provided, not a fee for inclusion or love. I informed them when I gave them the updated schedule. In stunning contrast to the emotional upheavals of the preceding months, the wedding day itself arrived bright and clear. At 4 p.m., the ceremony was planned, leaving the morning and early afternoon for preparations at the Clayton Hotel. Mom remained as she had promised, but she was clearly under stress from the effort. Although we didn't communicate much, she was generally courteous. She concentrated on portraying the bride's mother to the attendees in the gathering in the ideal way. I assisted Rebecca in putting on the bridal gown that I had not been there to witness her select. I experienced a brief sense of grief for the unusual happiness that this day ought to have brought. Rebecca saw how I looked in the mirror. She whispered, "I wish we could erase the last few months." I don't. To my amazement, I answered, even though it hurt. It made the truth more visible. Now we can construct something healthier. Radiant in ivory lace, she turned to me. My big sister became so clever most likely when my younger sister became so courageous. I answered, fixing her veil carefully. Everything about the ceremony went quite well. I proudly stood next to Rebecca, clutching her bouquet while she and James uttered heartfelt vows. Mom sat next to Dad in the front row. Her eyes periodically met mine with unreadable emotion, her poise flawless. The most surprising healing moment happened during the reception. During cocktail hour, as people mixed, I was briefly by myself by the gift table, rearranging some misplaced cards, its lovely calligraphy. From behind me came Mom's voice. "You did that, didn't you?" I turned, expecting a compliment disguised as criticism, but there was something in her face that I rarely saw directed at me. Sincere gratitude. "Yes." I replied plainly. Rebecca talked about how much she loved hand lettering. Mom nodded, and we were left in an awkward stillness. Her voice was softer and less confident when she finally spoke again. You've always observed the specifics of people's interests and priorities. That gift was never mine. She made a tiny but profound admission that immediately stopped me in my tracks. Catherine suggested the therapist. Mom says I need to work on recognizing other strengths without feeling devalued by them. And she kept averting her eyes from me. A short laugh without humor. It seems like I have some work to do there. Do you have a therapist? I couldn't contain my amazement when I spoke. After everything? Your father insisted. She squared her shoulders and trailed off. I don't think this will make our relationship better. If it is possible at all, I am aware that it will require time. I'm trying, though. There was no apology. There was no change in appearance. However, it was a small break in the wall of self-denial she had erected, and that was sufficient for today. Our family started exploratory group therapy sessions a month after the wedding. Mom initially went grudgingly. Dad increasingly rediscovered his voice, voicing facts long hidden, while the framework provided her with acceptable means to communicate her demands without manipulation. Rebecca and I fortified our sisterhood, which was now based on respect for one another instead of codependency. I also carried on with my own healing process on my own. Not just with family, but in all interactions. I set more defined limits. Most significantly, I started to appreciate myself and learned to spot when my assistance was going too far. Aside from what I could offer or accomplish for other people, Tyler had been my pillar of support over the whole affair. He never wavered in his unwavering support. He proposed to Rebecca 6 months after her wedding while on a weekend trek to our favorite mountain overlook. Indeed, without hesitation but with a stipulation, I said. He waited, raising an eyebrow. We keep the planning of our wedding private, clear boundaries in a small committee. Not a drama. Below us, his laughter reverberated over the valley. Deal. In the years that followed, life kept changing. Mom's development happened in spurts. Some days exhibit real progress, while others revert to previous trends. Dad gained a new self-assurance that rekindled his long-suppressed hobbies as well as his marriage. I became an aunt to a young girl whose middle name, Lisa, made me cry when Rebecca and James received their first child. And maybe most importantly, I discovered that limits are not obstacles to love and that forgiveness does not necessitate forgetting. Foundations for its healthiest manifestation, and that maintaining your self-worth is not selfish, but rather necessary. We all agreed on the path from that terrible night when my mother said those hurtful comments, "At the wedding, you are not welcome," to my current position. Director. Wasn't it simple? It took guts to confront unpleasant realities, the ability to discern between poisonous and good relationships, and the fortitude to demand the deference I was due. Remember that sometimes the most difficult limits to set are the ones that finally result in healing if you're dealing with comparable family issues or unpleasant exclusions. Your value isn't based on what other people think of you. Reconciliation can sometimes be the first step toward a healthy one, even when it appears to be firmly closed. Your opinions on this story would be greatly appreciated. Have you ever had to set tough boundaries with loved ones or resist familial pressure when others failed to recognize your importance? How did you find the strength to appreciate yourself? If this tale touched a chord with you, please leave a comment below and remember to like, subscribe, and share. As we work together to negotiate these complex human situations, your support is crucial. I appreciate you listening. Also, keep in mind that your story is important.